is starting. And that is just a reminder that this session is being recorded, and by participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of this session.
Okay, thank you.
Take it away, Amanda.
Thanks. Okay, so pretty short agenda, but a lot of information. I'm going to give you a little bit of an update about May payments, then talk about the grant updates. And then I will be turning it over to Cheryl, who will be leading a discussion around tips for you to submit your grants. And hopefully they'll get through more quickly. And as a reminder, as you're logging on, make sure you're muted. Thanks. So in April, those of you who qualified for incentive funding should have gotten 2 payments, assuming that you did everything else correctly with your FAI reconciliation of cash on hand reports. So you got the lump sum incentive funds payment, plus many of you probably also got a regular April payment. The April payment was probably larger than your previously monthly payments because the lump sum was added to the overall grant amount, and then they took 1/12 of that. So you would have gotten a big chunk of money in April. And it is likely that the FAI system, which determines how much monthly payments are and whether you get money in a given month, etc., may have determined that it thinks that you were sitting on a lot of cash on hand for May and therefore suspended May payment. So if you did not get a May payment, and this would have been on your 064 grant or the Family Literacy 054 grants, this would not have impacted the 061 or 259 grants. You may not have gotten a May payment. If you believe that you need an on-demand payment, which would be 1 month's payment, in addition to a June payment, please email your advisor by tomorrow. I realize it's a short turnaround time, but the controller's office prefers that we request all on-demand payments in a single communication rather than doing them piecemeal. So if you believe that you will need an on-demand payment of 1 month's grant amount plus the June payment that you should be getting, please send an email to your advisor by tomorrow and we'll pull that together to let controllers know. So regarding the 24-25 continuation grants, so this would be the Adult Basic Education Direct Service grant, the Section 243 IELCE grant, and the Family Literacy grants. Those are the continuation grants. For the Adult Basic Education Direct Service grant, we have enough funding in the federal funds to give all grantees a 3% cost of living increase on the federal dollar amount. We only applied it to the federal dollar amount, and that is for all grantees, regardless of your performance so far this year. The state 064 amount will include any additional funds for direct service staff that you requested and were approved for. We were not able to award everyone's request for additional funds. So if we approved you for those additional funds, that will be included in the state 064 amount. Now, for the Section 243 IELCE grants, they're also federal funds, 3% cost of living increase for all grantees. Regarding the federal funds, I do want to kind of explain how we are able to do this cost of living increase. It's really because back in 2020, 21 and 21-22, agencies returned or did not use a lot of funding due to the pandemic. And so we had a lot of federal funds available to us. Federal funds our 27-month funds at the state level, which means we could take expenditures from following years and kind of charge them back to use up the old funds, which then frees up funds in the current year. Because agencies were so underspent for those 2 years, we have a significant cushion of federal funds that will allow us to maintain this COLA. So we'll be able to give you an increase for next year, and we'll be able to maintain that federal amount for the years to come, assuming there are no significant cuts in funding at the federal level. However, we're only able to do this because there are these unexpended funds from a couple of years ago. Those will run out, and the actual annual award to Pennsylvania will not be enough to maintain that higher amount in the next grant cycle. So I know a lot of you kind of say, well, if you give us more money, how long are we going to have it? So what I'll say is, we've done some calculations. We believe that we can give you this 3% COLA for 24-25, and that we'll be able to maintain that higher amount for the next 2 years of the grant cycle. But when we have that competition, of course, when there's a competition, everything's up in the air anyway. But there will be less money available when the next competition comes around. For family literacy direct service, because that's 100% state funds and we don't know what's happening with the state funding, there's no cost of living increase. However, for family literacy programs, some of you got additional funds based on your 2022-23 performance. The 24-25 grant will include that increase. And for those of you that request additional funds, that should be additional funds for direct service staff that will also be in there if we approved it for you.
Amanda, before you move on, there is a question in the chat.
Okay.
Will the 3% be based on the salary line from the current year?
The 3% is 3% of your federal of your
total grant.
No. It is 3% of the federal portion of your 23-24 grant. So we took your 23-24 federal 064 amount, and it's 3% of that.
But not just, she's asking about the salary line. It's not the salary line. It's the
full
amount.
No. Right, yeah. Right. Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood that question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the full grant amount, not salary. Okay, now, we recognize that we have a local match requirement for the federal funds, and we've increased your federal funds for COLA. We are therefore reducing the required local match to 20%. So up through this program year. So for your 23-24 grants, when you do the FERs, it will be a 25% local match. But for 24-25, we are only requiring a 20% local match. Again, that's on, it's 20% of the overall cost of your program, including any non-federal funds. So for the purposes of determining the amount, just take your federal 064 grant amount and divide by 4. And that will tell you what your local match will need to be for your 24-25 grant. For the state 064 grant, we recognize that we gave a lot of programs additional funds for direct service staff. And in most cases, those direct service staff are not doing anything related to your volunteer classroom aid activities. Therefore, the 10% requirement for 1692 will be based on the 2022-23 064 grant amount. So it'll be 10% of the original, not, you don't have to use 10% of your additional funds for the 1692. you may, but it is not required. And then for the Section 243 grants, we're also reducing the local match requirement to 20%. Any additional questions, Christine?
Nothing in the chat, no.
Okay. For the additional funds for staff, if we approved your request, there will be in the state 064 and the family literacy 054 budget sections, there will be specific sections for those additional funds for staff. So you will put those in. Any additional funds that you were awarded for staffing must go in those specific sections, and you must use those funds only for what the division approved them for. So if it turns out that you don't need the full amount, you'll need to let us know, and we will reduce it by the amount that you don't need, because there are other programs that requested funds and did not get them. For those of you that had the option, add a full-time teacher with increased contracted enrollment, your advisor will contact you to discuss the new enrollment numbers as you're working on the grants next month. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that slide. Funding notification letters will be going out this afternoon. I was waiting until we had today's webinar. They'll be going out this afternoon with a target date for you to submit them by June 30th. If you submit them earlier, that's wonderful. We'll start reviewing them when they come in. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are sitting on a pot of federal funds that are available to us because of under expending during the pandemic. We use a portion of that for the COLA, but we also want to recognize programs that are doing well and give them the opportunity to request additional money above and beyond the COLA for increased contracted enrollment in 24-25. These are only available in the federal 064 and the 061 because they're federal funds. As I mentioned in last month's webinar, we used data from April 29th. So we pulled data from eData on April 29th. We did year-to-date agency enrollment and EFL gain, following the same process that we use for your agency performance. And students were only counted in one grant. So those of you who have multiple grants, if you have a student who was served in more than one of those grants, that student only counted in the grant in which they had the most hours, unless they were a family literacy adult, in which case they counted for family literacy. The criteria that we established after much discussion, the criteria that were established to determine which agencies would be eligible to request additional money for increased enrollment, where you had to have been at 80% or higher of your contracted enrollment, and you had to have had at least a 35% EFL gain. And unfortunately, there were not many programs who met those criteria. And it was both. So for 064, these 4 agencies are eligible to request. Actually, it's 5. One of them is a grantee and one of their sub-grantees. So these are the agencies that are eligible to request additional funds for increased enrollment. You are not required to request additional funds for increased enrollment, but you have the opportunity to. We recognize that the program year is not over, and that some programs are, you're still enrolling students, you're giving post-testing, you're working on intensity of instruction. So there will be another chance after the end of this program year to qualify for the eligibility to request additional money for increased enrollment. So we will do that after eData closes for the program year. So we'll have the full year of data. And in that case, obviously the criteria are higher because it's a full year. So you will have to have met or exceeded your 23-24 contracted enrollment. And for both 064 and 061, you have to have a 40% or higher EFL gain. And or for the 064 grantees only, if you showed a 10% or higher improvement in EFL gain from your final 22-23, we will also consider you eligible to request additional funds. So that is an and. So you have to meet or exceed your contracted enrollment and either have 40% or more EFL gain, or for 064 grantees, a 10% improvement in your EFL gain from 22-23. And again, you'll have the opportunity to request additional funds. You don't have to take it. We won't dictate to you exactly how much it is. We are going to be conservative because we can't be pushing out lots of money that we can't continue, but you may have the opportunity to request it, or you will have the opportunity to request it. And then just a couple of new items, really. One main new item in the grants for 24-25 in eGrants. I heard from several agencies, as well as kind of an observation from the advisors as well, that it was a little challenging to figure out where to put staff professional development, especially for students, for staff who were spread across several function codes. And so what we saw as we were reviewing grants is, somebody might have 1.25 hours in, function code 2300, and then they had 2.65 and another one. And we don't want you to have to do that, especially since a person who has multiple activities usually focuses their professional development in one key area. So there is a function code in eGrants called staff professional development. So we are adding that to the state 064 family literacy 054. It actually was already in the 061 grant, and then the tutoring 259 grant, we're adding that. We're not adding it to the federal 064 because all professional development time in the adult basic education grant needs to go on the state 064 budget. So put all staff time that you're budgeting for staff to engage in professional development in this function code 2270. Right? You don't have to split it across function codes. You don't need to, try and figure out, are they going to do it more in case management, or are they going to do more in instruction? Just put all staff time engaging in professional development in 2270. You can also put their associated benefits, staff associated benefits, and any costs associated with those staff participating in professional development for adult education, 2270. We are continuing to require you to put any kind of purchased professional development expenses in 2300-360. So that's the cost of your mandatory training at your agencies. If you hire someone to come in and do professional development, those still need to go in 2300-360. Okay, and I am now going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Why don't we, Amanda, before we do that, we don't have any questions in the chat, but maybe
give people some chance.
Give people a chance to unmute and ask questions if they want.
Sure.
So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. You'll have another opportunity at the end of the webinar, but I just thought while things are fresh in your mind.
What's considered mandatory PD at our agency?
So depending on the agency, for example, here at the Commonwealth, we have kind of annual, sexual harassment, discrimination, active shooter, safety, security. We have probably 20 or 30 mandatory trainings that we have to do every year. And at some agencies, the larger entity charges our grants to cover some of the cost of those trainings. That's what I mean by mandatory.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't something as simple as a PLC and I did it wrong. Okay.
No.
No. This
No.
this is something that would be mandatory
Okay,
as a part of employment at an overall entity.
I get it.
If
Thank
you're
you.
if you're a small community-based organization, you may not have anything like that.
Go ahead, Sue Clauser.
Thanks, Christine. Amanda, I was just wondering if you're able to give any updates on the tutoring program for adults grants at all?
They're still going through the whole review, scoring, and approval process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mercedes put a comment in the chat that she wants to listen. She's going to listen to it again and formulate questions then. That makes sense.
Okay.
It was a lot of information, so
Yeah.
that actually also makes sense. You can certainly, after you digest and think, you can, write to your advisor and ask follow-up questions. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised or anything else in the chat, Amanda, so if you want to
Okay.
turn it over to Cheryl.
Will do.
Hello, everyone. Go ahead, Amanda, and advance the slide. And we know in the grant routine, there are many aspects that you agencies cannot control regarding time, for instance. But to keep the grant moving along as steadily and quickly as possible, there are some key points you can do to impact the timeliness of the process, to get your approval sooner, to get your money sooner, and to get into eData sooner. Plus, you can keep your advisor happy. A happy advisor is a good thing. An advisor in a SNIT is a force to be reckoned with, so don't let that happen to you. And of course, your fiscal and data peeps will be happy, happy, happy. So next slide. Not sure what function object code combination to use? Look at the previous grant or FER. And even if you are sure, look at the previous grant or FER to make sure, because that's what's been approved. It's probably going to approve this year. Look at the guidelines so that you're not combining expenditures that are supposed to be separate. Most typical mistakes are expenses for conferences that might combine travel and the conference fee, for example. Another mistake we see is combining technology with paper-based materials. So check carefully and check again. Fiscal folks and admin folks. Next slide. You know those little notes in eGrants that specify required? That means, wait for it, some information is required, such as purchased equipment. And you'll see in the salary section when it says other in jobs requires an explanation in the comments as well. And that description column really is for more description. So the object code 610 says supplies. So we know it supplies. So more details, please. The same with benefits, for example. Next slide. Consistency is vital, not just nice, but vital. Each staff should have one name across all grants and always written the same way. so that it does not appear Amanda Harrison on federal, but Harrison, Amanda on state. The descriptions such as equipment should be the same across all grants as well. Next slide. We're going to see in a minute an Excel spreadsheet from eGrants. Here is a little snippet. This is how we at PDE may use to look at employees' total hours to make sure that no one has over 2,080 hours. But this employee has several different spelling and misspellings across several grants, so we cannot total. And we would be returning the grant to you for correction, delaying approval and money in eGrants. Next slide. Here's a surprise, and be sure and take notes here. Follow procedures and make sure your fiscal folks know what the procedures are too, and don't go all rogue. When submitting the grant, just submit the grant, meaning no need to check with the advisor first. But when grants are returned for corrections, and this is when a lot of time can be wasted. When grants are returned for corrections, make all the corrections quickly. In every section, every correction, quickly. This should be measured in hours or days, not weeks. Check and double check. Fiscal folks and the admin peeps. Email your advisor to review those corrections. Do not resubmit the grant until the advisor reviews and says okay. And this is critical. We do not want to return these suckers more times than we have to. Moving on, not sure if everyone knows about the Convert to Excel option on the eGrants budgets. Many of you have sophisticated software for accounting and personnel, so may not have the occasion to use this humble Excel tool. It is, however, what we use to check at PDE. And you know what we say, if it ain't in eData or in eGrants, it does not exist. So you may want to see what we see. We use this Excel version to check total of employees' hours and PD and prep time. It's useful in checking the FICA calculation, as well as for any typos when matching object codes with descriptions. So let's look quickly, and I'm going to share my screen. I say that like I actually know what I'm doing, right? Let's see if I can make that happen. Am I sharing my screen?
I do not see it, Cheryl. No.
Let me
Not
try
yet, no.
again. Sorry. I'm down to one monitor and it has confused me. Somebody's moved my food dish.
There we go. So we're seeing a Microsoft Word document that looks like a snippet.
Yes, good. So this is at the bottom right hand. Here's a total. This happens to be from a salary page. This little Excel button also occurs on the benefits page and the contracted services page, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's below the total. And now I'm going to try to find my Excel spreadsheet. Can you see my Excel spreadsheet now?
Yes.
Can you read it? Is it large enough, Christine?
Maybe hit the
A little bit
maximize,
bigger?
maybe hit the maximize button. Okay, make it a little bigger.
Is that a little better?
Yeah, we can see that pretty well
Okay.
now.
So this is the spreadsheet. What I have done across the top is to add the filter objects so that I can choose a filter for everything. In this particular example, I used an agency that has multiple grants. And so I chose to color code them so that I could quickly read. That's not important. It just made it easier for me to see. Because what I spotted right now was here is an 064. I used red for federal. Isn't that clever? And I can see, oh no, there's tutor training. That doesn't belong there. So it's easy to sort and filter and find the errors. I have organized this one by sorting alphabetically by name, and I did a subtotal for everyone. So every time the name changes, the subtotal changes. So staff member A, anyone, has 2,483 hours. I have chosen to highlight the professional development so I can do a real quick little check on that. Let me see if I can get this to work. Are you able to see this little bitty number down here that says 33? So if you highlight something, I highlighted the yellows, and at the bottom of my screen, it says 33. So it just told me quickly what the total of that would be so that I don't have to do any other sums. So you can sort and filter to your little heart's desire. And again, this is what we use. This is what we see. So if it ain't an e-grant, it doesn't exist. And this is a way that you can see what we can see. And that concludes my end of the presentation.
Cheryl, would it be okay if I jumped in and just clarified one thing?
Please do.
So what Cheryl showed you there was, in case, maybe I was the only one, but what Cheryl showed you there was she downloaded those spreadsheets from each grant. And then she either cut and pasted or whatever and made one big spreadsheet that had all the expenses on it. So there's nowhere to just click and get everything. You have to get that spreadsheet from each section on each grant and then combine them yourself.
Yes, thank you.
There's no global spreadsheet button.
Thank you. Yes, you're right.
And I think another clarification I found is when I use those is when you export the Excel spreadsheet, the numbers are not showing, do not export as numbers. I think they export as text, their labels. So you have to click on a cell. You can highlight a whole series of cells, and there's like a little exclamation point that allows you to convert to number. So you do have to manipulate them a little bit to make them useful, but once you figure that out, it is very useful. I think there
Aman-
was,
Mhm.
yes,
Amanda's talking about data and then text to column.
Mm,
So I had to highlight all of these numbers and then tell it text to column.
thank you.
Next, finish. I don't know what next does, but I know that I have to do next, finish. Thank you.
I believe there was a,
There's a question in the chat. The first question we have is, will a signature be needed before initial submission?
so for the continuation grants, that would be the adult basic education, section 243, and family literacy. No, you don't need the official signatory because it is not a new grant agreement. The original grant agreement for the family literacy and adult ed were back in 22-23. And for the section 243, it would have been last year. So no, for those three, you don't need the official signatory. You might need to type a name in, I don't remember, but you don't need the official signatory. The 22, 24, 25 draft guidelines available. I will send, they're currently on the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage. They were posted there for the tutoring program. I will send a link to that.
Do we have any other questions? Feel free to unmute if you wish. Or like Sue Klauser does, she raises her hand all the time. Okay. I guess we don't have any further questions. Amanda, do you want to reshare this slide presentation? So the final slide is part of the
Sure.
recording.
Okay. Questions? And then.
All right, well, thanks for joining, everybody. As usual, the recording will be posted on PA Adult Ed Resources in a couple days. And I believe the PDF of the PowerPoint slides was sent to you earlier, but that'll be posted shortly as well. Thank you for coming. I'm going to stop the recording.